Hello and welcome to the Write the Book Inside You podcast. Tips, tools and interviews for coaches and healers like you who want to write a non-fiction book to boost your visibility, clients and cash flow while making a difference. I'm your host, Carol Westmore, a multi-published author and energy psychology tapping book coach. Now let's jump into today's episode. It's January 2025, and this is episode 66, in which I introduce you to Brad Wetzler. In this interview, you'll hear the personal journey of an extraordinary author who I'm honored to have on the show. Brad Wetzler is an award-winning journalist and travel writer who in his 20s, 30s, and 40s was living the dream as a globe-trotting adventurer. But he was also living a lie. His book has been described as a trip to hell and back with glimpses of paradise along the way. Welcome, Brad.
Hi, Carol. It's so good to be here with you.
Your book has got so many layers which will, I'm sure, appeal to my listeners, many of whom are healers, therapists, coaches who have, either themselves been through trauma or help others through trauma. And your book is multi-layered with that. Psychiatrists told you that you were bipolar, and you actually wrote somewhere in the book, you might as well have called your memoir, Adventures in Psychiatry, How I Sold My Soul to the Medical Establishment. And I mean, it is heartbreaking how, aside from the trauma of your childhood, tell us about that side of how the basis of all your pain and suffering began in childhood. I think let's to the pivotal moment.
Yeah, when I was 12, I went on a group father-son canoe trip, and I grew up in Kansas City area in the U.S. and we went down to northern Arkansas, and there was some rivers there that are quite powerful. So we went on this father-son trip, and nobody knew how to canoe. No fathers or sons did, but it was quite a roaring river. It had been raining all spring. Well, we get into the canoe, and it was like Laurel and Hardy, and we're going backwards, forwards. And then after lunch, we entered the river again, and we got going sideways, and the water filled the canoe up, and then we tipped over, and I went floating down the river. And suddenly I felt this snap, this really strong snap, and I was jerked back, and I was really didn't know what was going on. And then I felt this log next to me, and I realized that my life jacket had gotten snagged on this log, and then it was a precarious, and I kept getting pulled under and then released back up and then pulled under again. And meantime, I'm watching as my father floated to the side of the bank. And well, eventually I was there for, I don't know how long, 5 to 10 minutes, in this terrifying situation, and feeling the water, the river pushing me into the log and also kind of clawing at me down to be free. And, I went into first an excited place, an angry place, then a numb place. And then eventually another canoe came down and just rammed into the log, and it set me free. During that time, I couldn't understand why my father hadn't done anything to come get me. And then when I got home, I went to tell my mother, and I had cuts up and down my body. And my father, for reasons I still don't totally understand, said that it didn't happen. And over the next many years and decades has told me that my shirt snagged on a twig. And he just, for some reason, and I try to have compassion, but just couldn't tolerate that he oversaw that, I guess. So anyway, I had to process that trauma alone, which I know you know about trauma. And
yes.
And then beyond that, then there was also alcoholism in my family, and
yes.
I became, the scapegoat, the feeler kid that everybody just kind of learned to dump their own projections on, and so the trauma was twofold. It was acute, and it was also complex trauma from being pushed out of my family.
I know at one point you say I had an internal father split complex almost. This
Mhm.
is long after many years of being misdiagnosed. There's no one
Yes.
really actually helping you with the trauma. You said, on the one hand, I wanted to please an impossible father who lied, gaslit me, and demeaned me, and was an alcoholic. And on the other hand, I saw him as this charismatic, idealized father that I wanted to look up to, and that you basically excused because you didn't know any better. And you
Yeah.
didn't have, you see, I also had an alcoholic father, but I had a mother who was there for me and who protected me,
Yeah.
and it didn't sound like you had that. So you were on your own in this
Yeah.
continuing situation, toxic family, weren't you?
Yes. Yes. And then you did mention in the intro about this visit with a psychiatrist. So, I was struggling with PTSD all through my teens and college years, extreme depressions, emotional flashbacks, and distant family member. This is back around like 1989, and there wasn't the talk there is today about trauma. I mean,
No,
with
exactly.
trauma, we're veterans of the wars, and so the psychiatrist, this friend set me up to go to a psychiatrist. I spent 45 minutes with him. Didn't ask me a thing about my family, my situation with my family. I told him about my depressions. I also, as from a young age, was quite a religious little kid on my own, not from my family stuff. And I had little mystical experiences, and I described them to this doctor. And after one 45-minute session, I walked out with a diagnosis of bipolar and a prescription for lithium, which
Mm.
then I took for many years until my kidneys began to fail. So
Yeah, so it's just absolutely a sort of tragic story, and I mean, in the end, reading you ended up with a whole cocktail of drugs, antipsychotics, mood stabilizers, sedatives, amphetamines, sleeping pills, because trying to help yourself, and at the same time, let's just tell the world you were a brilliant writer, and writing for the New York. I don't know all the magazines because I'm from I'm from
yeah,
South Africa
all
actually,
the
but
best, very best magazines in the U.S., including the New York Times, Newsweek, all these GQ, lots of big magazines. So
so that was, but underneath the lie was that, in
yeah,
fact, you were buying in, as you said as well, to the patriarchal idea of success, and maybe you even mention, and these are through layers of the book, that you were really trying to ask your father to recognize you and love you, and all the years that he was an alcoholic, you would walk him to bed, and you were
yeah,
just this traumatized kid
yeah,
trying to get through a time, which we will, which is the basis of what your healing journey becomes, really.
yes,
And I think someone put it brilliantly, and they said, and I'm saying to people, by the end of this interview, we'll learn how you unchained yourself from the tortured coils of childhood trauma. That was one
yes.
of your
The
endorsements of
birth
your book.
writers, yeah, yeah,
And I think, aside from telling us about the countries you visited, I'd like to hear, perhaps as best you can, the unraveling of those coils of childhood traumas, which maybe two or three of the pivotal moments, one of which I know is yoga. So tell us
yes,
how the healing
yeah.
started.
Well, I must have been about 46 or 7, and I'd become friends with the nephew of my then fiance, and he died by suicide. And I remember getting the call to go. I just remember that morning sitting with his body. At that time, I had been taking all those drugs. I saw it as an addiction too. Now I do anyway, but trying to numb out. And I knew that if I didn't get off these drugs, that I was going to end up like this young man that whose body I was with. And something happened. Something woke up inside me then. One of the things that has healed me has been finding a spiritual path. After
Yes.
years of being a journalist and being agnostic, almost atheist. Around that time, I read an article that there was a new trail in Israel that followed the path that Jesus walked from Nazareth to the Sea of Galilee, or supposedly walked. And And I just said, I got to go do that. And I'm going to write about it. And again, and I hadn't written an article in years. I'd been selling junk at a flea market to get by at that point. And so I hiked that trail, and I also just explored Israel and Palestine for about 10 weeks. And it began to open up my openness to spirituality again. And I realized that when I got home that I wasn't going to be a Christian again, but I was open to something greater than myself. And I'd been allowed these doctors to pathologize me, to define me, and I'd done it to myself. I had allowed them to do it. I had bought into their systems and their diagnoses. And so that trip opened me up. And then I began reconnecting with my yoga practice, which put me back into my body, which was important because I had just, with all those drugs and all that sedentary life, I wasn't in my body anymore. And slowly, as I got back in my body, I found a psychiatrist. I moved away to a different city. I found a psychiatrist to take me off all these meds, who said, let's get you off of all these and let's see who you are underneath. And that guy saved my life. And so once I got off the medications, it became clear that I wasn't bipolar. I was suffering from PTSD. And I began to work with a trauma therapist who, again, the focus was on the body and getting, as you know, trauma is stored in the body, and understanding the triggers and more mindfulness around what's happening, keeping one foot, in the present, knowing that when I'm having a flashback, that I really wasn't literally going back into time, even if it felt like that. And I also, I had lost during that PTSD intense period. I'd become very alone. It seems like
Yes.
I forgot I'd isolated a lot, which is a common thing. And I just kind of forgot how to have friends. And the unhealthy parts of me had pushed people away too, the anger that lived inside me. But I eventually learned how to be in community again. I found a yoga community. I became a yoga teacher, and I started to have people around me again. Dogs, I
Yes.
always loved dogs, but dog love became a big part of my recovery.
I love, tell us the story. Just pause there. Blue. Yes. Tell us
Yeah.
the story of Blue.
Yeah, so Blue, the psychiatrist that got me off of all the medications, at one point, I was alone and living alone in this little tiny apartment. And she said, you got to go get a dog. And so I went down to the shelter, and I was just drawn to the loneliest looking dog. And he was so cute, and he had, he'd been traumatized himself, which is obviously one reason I was connecting with him. But he had, his teeth had been ground down from being on a chain or in a cage. He had buckshot in his side from being shot. But I got him home that night, and I had to run out and get food, and I put him in a crate for just 30 minutes while I went out and got food. And when I got home, he dismantled the crate and was on the bed, looking guilty. But how could I do anything to this guy? And so we just developed this really close relationship. He just became my shadow. Dogs' lives are short, and he passed away in 2019, but he surely was a big part of my recovery.
Yes, I believe that. I can feel, because I lost my dog in the fire, and
Oh,
he'd been my angel dog who walked with me on the mountain in Cape Town. So I know that.
this is Tommy. This is
You got another one. Oh, lovely. Yeah. So we digress a little bit, but I think your book is so rich with every page has got something that I want to jot down or could refer to. So I'm going to just ask you for some of these. Well, you are a writer. You teach writing as well, and one of the things you
Yes.
say about memoir, you want to follow the narrator. He must be a few steps ahead of you and have an enticing beginning, and then the suspense, and then the anecdotes. And I don't know if you consciously did that or how you wrote your book, but did you have journal excerpts, or, when you actually wrote it?
I actually was fortunate, and I sold the book on a proposal. I had written enough and been published enough in the past that was an option for me. And so I wrote a 50 or 60 page book proposal, and Hachette Book Group bought the book, but they only gave me about 6 or 7 months to write it. And, one of the things they wanted from me, because I'd been an adventure writer, they wanted me to tell this story as an adventure. And when
Yes.
they asked for that, that really helped simplify my narrative. I wasn't just telling the story of Brad, or I wasn't telling the story of PTSD recovery. It was they wanted an adventure story about
Mm.
this recovery, and that, and I knew how to do that well, and
The
so
book, the healing does take you to many places,
yes.
travel as a travelogue. Can you tell us? Okay, so continue.
Yeah. So, well, one of the things in my healing journey is I traveled so much, and I needed to travel again. But I also, now that I was on a deep spiritual path, and really practicing yoga and reading, the ancient yogi texts and everything, I just knew I had to go back to India, where I'd been in 1999 as a reporter. And that had been kind of a life-changing, in 99 had been life-changing trip, because when I got my work done as a reporter, I went to Varanasi, this really ancient city, and I'd observed, them burning the bodies on the ghats by the Ganges, and gone into these temples, and it had just shaken my soul, in a way that I didn't forget. I knew I had to go back to India, and yoga had become a huge thing for me. And, also the teachings of Ram Dass and the music of this artist Krishna Das that were uh, studied with a certain guru in northern India. Well, I went back to that place. And while I was there, one of my friends said that he'd heard that there was a 100-year-old yogi living in a cave up on the mountaintop. And I said, we've got to go, So my friends and I, hiked up about an hour up to the top of this mountain, and I watched my friends enter, and everyone bowed at the yogi, and then it was my turn. And as I entered the cave, the dim lights, the candles, there was a fire burning, and I bowed at his feet, and I remember having my hands on his shoes. I was just utterly amazed that this was real. I mean, I could not, this was like out of a movie.
Mm.
And as I sat up, I felt him smack the top of my head. I knew what it was. I mean, I'd read enough about it, but I also was so surprised, and I didn't really understand what was going on at the time. But as he and I made eye contact, I just started weeping, and I wept
Mm.
all afternoon in the cave. It was just sort of like, I don't know, it was like a grandfather that was seeing me for the first time. And it was
Mm.
also something more than that. There's a term in India called Shaktipat. It's when a great spiritual teacher, puts spiritual energy into you
Mm.
physically. And I think that's what happened, because the next morning, I woke up and I was drinking tea overlooking this valley, and I fell into a trance. And at first I thought I was getting sick, and I thought about taking antibiotics for it, but then I realized this was not that. And it felt like I was, tripping on psychedelic drugs.
Mm.
And eventually, this turned into a massive mystical experience in which it just seemed like the whole universe was knitted together, and I could see everything. And I sat on top of this building for 12 hours. It lasted 12 hours. And that became another anchor in my life, of something, of seeing the divine, of feeling like I belong to the universe. And so that was something else that happened. And so, yeah, since then, I still go back to India about every year and a half. But travel became a big part of the healing. It was something I did and I needed to do again.
As I'm sitting here listening to you, I'm just thinking of how powerful it would be if you offered small groups trips to India,
Yes, it's been a
spiritual
dream
seek.
of mine. It's been a dream of mine, and I haven't pulled it together yet. And it's exactly what I want to be doing.
Yeah,
So thank you for
I can
saying that.
visualize you doing that because, there would be people who, although, you can help with their trauma, but it's just
Yeah,
the travel aspects, and you could sell that, someone who's traveled to so many places. I don't know if you would only want to go to, but you could probably go to spiritual places like Peru, or, I
yeah,
don't
no,
know.
I agree. And even local place. I mean, it could be a combination of all of them. And you're exactly right. That's my dream. And I think I need to find a partner that could manage those trips, so I could focus on the teaching and the travel.
Yes. You wrote the book inside you. Yeah. So what else could we tell our listeners about your journey? I mean, I don't know whether I should skip to the end of the book, but there's this thing that Krishna Das told you about thinking too much is a prison.
Yes.
Then at the end, I think it's called metta prayer that helped you.
Yeah. During my recovery, I did a lot of reading, and a lot of, I did workshops too, in both yoga and Buddhism. And and I came across this metta meditation, METTA, and it's essentially self forgiveness, and self befriending, and befriending the world, meditation. And I believe the story is that the Buddha came up with it he gave this practice to monks living in the forests that were afraid of spirits and tigers and all of that. So it was a way to stay calm and present. It's essentially calling, befriending yourself. You say, may I be, may I be safe from internal and external dangers. May I be well in body and mind. May I be happy, and may I be free. And then you pivot towards a friend, and you do that. And then you repeat it again towards perhaps a stranger. And then you bless all beings,
Yes.
same meditation. And it's a way to get out of, out of your own stuff sometimes too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I think it had quite an effect on you, you said in the book.
Yes.
There were times when you would just keep saying it,
Yes.
and it helped a lot. That was
And
one. And then,
eventually, this trauma therapist I work with just began to, as I began to process the trauma, I began to see myself, as she says in the book, you're no longer, a child of your family. You're now a child of God, a child of the universe. And it almost makes me tear up as I tell you.
yeah, I feel,
I know. It's just,
and
realizing that you aren't your trauma, and you aren't these stories, even though you need to move through them, you need to honor them and tell them. And then you need to finally learn to let loose, or hold them more loosely, I think, and see
yes.
yourself in a bigger light.
Well, I mean, I wrote how you ended the book, based
Huh?
on Neem Karoli Baba, is it? Well, first
Yes.
tell us about how he came into your life, and then we'll, you know,
Yeah. Well, some point, even in the most drugged out years, a friend gave me a set of tapes of Ram Dass, and I began listening to Ram Dass's teachings. And he had been a professor at Harvard, explored psychedelic medication or drugs and stuff, but then he'd gone to India, and he had this very intellectual man had met this guru named Neem Karoli Baba, who was kind of he didn't really have a system. He loved you from the inside out, is what Ram Dass said. And so this very intellectual man who, in some ways, it reminded me he's a thinker. So he reminded me of myself in that way. Not that I'm, as smart as Ram Dass, but it just spoke to me that the answer wasn't in this thinking. It wasn't a system. And then I came under kind of the spell of Neem Karoli Baba from a distance. And then Krishna Das, this musician, who sings chanting music, who also was with Neem Karoli Baba. I went to his workshops, and he said that thoughts are a prison. He just taught me to begin to hold more loosely to them. This is where the Eastern wisdom is so
mm,
brilliant. I think we all in the West can learn from it. That you just learned that, the heart is where, the heart and our bodies are just as much a part of us as the brain. And we in the West just think ourselves into knots. And that became, chanting became a big part of my recovery. So
yes, because
that's
that,
Nico Baba. And to this day, he's on my altar, his picture is, and he's thought to be kind of a Christ figure in India. And
about now Neem
Neem
Baba, or
Karoli Baba, yeah.
oh, not Krishna Das, yeah.
Yeah.
Because I'm just reading from or what I think at the end of your book you tell people in your yoga classes that he said,
Yeah.
why try to figure it all out when you can love? And then you
Yeah.
end, nothing left to do, nothing left to think.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
and
That
I
was
did,
that's one of his famous quotes, is why try to figure all out when you can just love. And it's a beautiful line, I think, and I say that in my yoga classes still. So
yes. So you teach online yoga. Let's tell people how they can connect with you, Brad.
sure. So you can find me at my website, which is bradwetzler.com, and that's
Yes.
BRADWETZ as in zebra, LER.com. I'm
Yes.
also on Instagram and Facebook, and at Brad Wetzler. And I would love to hear from you if you're working on a story or going through your own healing. I'd love to hear about your journey. And I love connecting with people who are on their own journeys of healing and transformation.
Yes. So do you think a memoir is a way that the people who've had a healing journey, it may not be as rich as yours, but do you think it's worthwhile to teach them? There are people who want to
Absolutely.
learn from you. No, I want you to. I don't want people to say later, why didn't she let him talk?
Right. The experience I had, it was a very intense 6 or 7 months when I wrote my book. And I did sort of have to focus on that, keeping one foot in the present and one foot in the past and trying to tell these stories. And here's what's interesting today. I couldn't write that book today because I've healed so much since writing those last words in the epilogue. So much of the trauma healed in the writing of it. It's sort of like tied up loose ends in a way, and it kind of put things in the rearview mirror. I was really surprised by it. No, I still have stuff I struggle with, but that was a hugely healing part of that I was surprised by. And now I'm not surprised when I work with people and see the healing that they do when they write their books.
So if people go to your website, they can find out how to connect with you. What about the yoga classes? Is that something you do online?
So they can on my website. You can sign up time. You can actually go to my schedule, and I do a free 30-minute call. So you can do that on my website. At this exact moment, I paused the yoga teaching, but I plan to restart it again in the next month. And you can I'll if you stay on my newsletter. You can sign up for my newsletter on the website, and I'll let you know when I restart that. But I do that on Zoom, and it's a beautiful, a nice, easy flow vinyasa class, and it's just a way to connect with my readers, and in a way that I can share something other than the intellect again, right? Because it helps get into our bodies. Place.
I haven't done classes online, but that's a good idea. That you will be wanting the dream of taking people on trips to India and retreats.
Yes,
could be happening in the next year or two.
Absolutely, and thank you for saying that. And I do lead local. I live in Boulder, Colorado, in the foothills of the mountains, the Rocky Mountains, and so I've done retreats here. But you're absolutely right. The next step is to be leading trips abroad, to India especially, sharing my love of travel and writing memoir with people. So
maybe they can combine or whatever. Oh, well, that's great. It was lovely speaking to you. As I say, your book is so rich and so healing just to read, and to know that you went through that and have come out the other side and now are sharing your own healing with others is really amazing. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And I know you do much of this similar work, and thank you for doing what you do.
Didn't you love the part of where he talked about his love of dogs and Blue, who saved his life when he was so down and addicted? Well, if you want a book that really rivets you from beginning to end, and you are interested in someone's powerful healing story, then Into the Soul of the World, My Journey to Healing is the book for you. I hope this interview with this brilliant and gentle man called Brad Wetzler has inspired you to not only buy the book, but think of writing your own healing memoir. Because as he said, by the time he finished his book, he was a different person from the person who went through the catharsis of actually remembering and writing all that he'd been through in his life. Thank you for listening, and please like and subscribe and share this podcast with your friends. Thank you. Thanks for joining me on today's podcast. Want a free gift to inspire you further on your book writing adventure? My free checklist, 5 book hook tips to kickstart your book writing journey, will help you get clarity on the key essentials to make your book a winner. Download it at writethebookinsideyou.com/free gift. The links are in the show notes. Until next time, a big virtual hug and keep writing.